box of hardtack could sit in the chuck wagon for an entire season and still be edible at the end. It might be infested with weevils, small beetles that would bore into the crackers, but cowboys would just knock the bugs out and eat it anyway. Extra protein, they joke. Cowboys had a saying about hardtack. It's the only food that fights back. You'd tap it on the table to knock out the weevils, and sometimes you'd see them crawling around. Most cowboys would just eat it in the dark so they couldn't see what they were chewing. Now, hardtack wasn't something you'd eat by choice. It was bland, hard, and about as appetizing as eating cardboard. But when you're 3 days from the nearest town and the chuck wagon tipped over in a river crossing, ruining most of your supplies, hardtack might be all that stands between you and starvation. Cookie would sometimes make a dish called skilly-gully, hardtack soaked in water, then fried in bacon grease. These weren't gourmet meals, but they turned an inedible survival ration into something approaching real food. Smart trail bosses always kept 50 to 100 pounds of hardtack in reserve, stored in a waterproof container. It was insurance against disaster. But hardtack wasn't the only backup plan. The Great Plains themselves offered food for those who knew where to look. The Great Plains weren't as empty as they looked. Cowboys who knew what to look for could supplement their diet with food that grew wild along the trail. But you had to know what you were doing, because one mistake could kill you. Experienced cowboys and cooks learned to identify edible plants along the trail. Wild onions, prairie turnips, and prickly pear cactus were all fair game. These weren't just supplements, sometimes they were the difference between health and scurvy. Wild onions grew in patches across the prairie. You could smell them before you saw them. Cookie would send a couple of cowboys to dig up a sackful, and that night's beans would have actual flavor beyond salt and pork. The onions also provided vitamin C, though nobody knew about vitamins back then. They just knew fresh vegetables kept you healthy. Prickly pear cactus was another valuable find. The pads could be roasted over the fire after carefully removing the spines. They tasted something like green beans with a slightly slimy texture. The fruit, when ripe, was sweet and juicy, a real treat in the desert. Cowboys called prickly pear the vegetable that fights back, because even after you thought you'd removed all the spines, you'd find tiny ones stuck in your fingers for days. Prairie turnips, also called Indian breadroot, were a staple food of Plains Indians that some cowboys learned to use. These root vegetables could be eaten raw, roasted, or dried and ground into flour. They were starchy and filling, a welcome change from beans. The trick was knowing where to find them. They grew deep underground, and you had to know what the plant looked like above ground to know where to dig. But foraging was dangerous. Eat the wrong plant, and you'd be dead by morning. Water hemlock looked similar to wild parsnip, but was deadly poisonous. Loco weed would make cattle and horses go crazy, and it wasn't good for humans either. Only experienced men gathered wild plants, and even then they were careful. There are accounts of entire crews getting sick from eating the wrong mushrooms or roots. Some crews would gather wild plums, grapes, or berries when they found them. Cookie would make preserves by boiling the fruit with sugar, then storing it in jars. These preserves were precious. A spoonful on a biscuit was a luxury that reminded cowboys of home. Mesquite beans were another resource in the Southwest. These could be ground into flour or boiled into a sweet syrup. They were free, plentiful, and nutritious. Cowboys who worked the southern trails learned these tricks from Mexican vaqueros and Native Americans. Smart cowboys paid attention to what the locals ate and followed their lead. From salt pork to sourdough starter to wild prairie turnips, these preservation methods weren't just survival techniques. They were the foundation that made the American West possible. Without them, there would be no cattle drives, no frontier towns, no cowboy legend. Every meal was a small victory against a landscape that didn't care whether you lived or died. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories.